innovation is the hallmark of U.S. manufacturing. This is where so much of the world's transformation has taken place over the last three industrial revolutions, and we're in the same place today, and a great place to capitalize on these great technology and cultural transitions as we move forward. But whether we acknowledge it or not, it's kind of the domain of the Fortune 1000, maybe the Fortune 2000, because they have the pockets that are deep enough for the cost and complexity of the status quo.
Welcome to the Change Agent Podcast. My name is Nathan Lesnowski. I'm Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer. I'm so glad to be with you today. This podcast has been such a blessing to us. We've seen so many different guests who've had different perspectives, from manufacturing to healthcare to educational services. The transformation that's happening within the technology industry and how it's transforming businesses is so immense. And the perspectives we've gotten from our guests have been so powerful. So that makes me really proud to bring a guest to the table today that speaks to not just the transformation of an individual business, but speaks to the transformation of an entire industry and how that industry needs that transformation, how that industry needs to see how it can become more than it is today. So my guest today is John Dyck. John Dyck is the CEO of the CESMII Smart Manufacturing Institute. He leads the transformation of leveraging CESMII's assets and its engagement within the manufacturing community to transform the way that manufacturing organizations look at how they deliver products to their customers, how they make products, how they run that manufacturing process, how they understand demand and inventory forecasting, and also how they then deliver that service to their customers in an optimized way, bringing about clean industry, manufacturing optimization, lean, transformed enterprises, connected devices. It's such a rich area for us to be talking about today. So welcome, John, to our conversation. Welcome to kind of digging in today. So John, maybe as a first question, just tell me a little bit about who you are as a CESMII organization. What is CESMII? Dig into it. Tell me a little bit about what this thing is.
Well, thanks for having me today. It's truly an honor to be with you and to have this conversation. These are exciting topics, probably more exciting today than they have been for most of my career, and it's an honor to be here with you today. CESMII, which is an institute funded by the federal government to drive smart manufacturing into the U.S. manufacturing marketplace, to innovate, to inspire innovation, to essentially, from our perspective, accelerate the democratization of smart manufacturing. This is why we're here. This is what we're all about, and it's essentially a core part of our DNA to understand deeply what this ecosystem looks like and how we can accelerate the transition from really the third industrial revolution, which was a 50-year period that I think most of us have done a lot of work in, and transitioning to the fourth industrial revolution. That kind of thing doesn't happen overnight. It's an ecosystem challenge. It's an ecosystem set of opportunities, and CESMII is really here to look at this ecosystem, bring the smart people of this space together, and try to solve the big problems that are really going to help manufacturers, big and small, and across all industries, truly drive smart manufacturing into their behavior, into their cultures, and obviously into their plant floors, into their supply chains to make the improvements that are so important for us to stay competitive as a nation.
Awesome. So John, tell me a little bit about how you entered into the role of leading this organization. You've had a variety of experiences that informed your background that enabled you to be effective at helping with this broad industry move. Walk us through that.
Sure. So I've worked for two large corporations in my career and one small startup. And they've all been focused on sort of the manufacturing operations side. I generally sort of bucket experience either coming from the OT sort of operations and automation side, or more from the IT and the enterprise side, because that's generally where most of us fall. So I came from that OT automation software side. And increasingly over my career, working for Rockwell Automation and then for General Electric, and then this small startup that I helped raise some venture capital for and bring to the marketplace and then see it acquired. My experience over those 25 years was that this industry is facing some significant challenges. This is probably, in my beliefs, this is the most complex part of the manufacturing enterprise world, this plant floor software space, this domain that we would largely refer to as smart manufacturing today. And along the way, for the last 10 to 12 years, I was part of an association called MESA, the Manufacturing Enterprise Solutions Association, kind of created to bring about the best practices for seeing the transformation of the industry, very much focused on bringing the industry together, creating best practices, papers, and teaching people how to do these things. I worked with some of the best organizations on the planet to do that, including Microsoft and SAP and IBM, and of course the big OT vendors, the automation vendors like Rockwell and Siemens and GE and Emerson and AspenTech and others. But what I saw across the board was that we were all facing the same struggles. We're all sort of working our way as broadly as manufacturing software has matured over the last two decades. I would say we were and are facing the same challenges, trying to work with manufacturing organizations that face a complex and diverse set of operations for which there are very few standards. And you've got this historic, I hate to use the phrase OT-IT convergence, but you've got this historic challenge between those folks in the plants and those folks at the enterprise that are incentivized to do different things, but fundamentally all work for the same organization. And so when I had the opportunity 2.5 years ago to leave Rockwell Automation, which is a great company focused in this space, and lead CESMII as a federally funded institute to identify and tackle some of these historic challenges and to do something meaningful and audacious, really, to drive the industry forward as an ecosystem. This is truly an ecosystem challenge. This is not something any one organization can tackle and successfully accomplish. To take this ecosystem and make a difference and bring it forward, that was an opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and one that I am thankful to say I was successful and have been here for almost 2.5 years now, working on some of these big challenges.
Yeah, that's a great story, and it's so relevant because you're right. From my perspective, I've seen so many manufacturing organizations that, I don't know, they can't get out of their own way, but it's not just because they don't have the energy or the desire. It's as an industry, we haven't made the optimizations, the set of assets as available as an industry to accelerate the transformation. It's almost like every manufacturer is kind of doing it on their own and transforming on their own pace. And we needed something that would help us to push the whole industry forward. So can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing there? You know, how is the work at CESMII that you're doing and your team is doing, how is it engaging within that industry market and transforming how they're operating?
Yeah, it's a great question. The last 2 decades have seen unprecedented challenges for manufacturers here in the U.S. and really in most developed nations as they've been facing competitive pressures all over the planet, as they've been working to implement significant regulatory systems to make sure they do the right things, and obviously safety and quality and productivity are all strategic initiatives that have always been in place for these organizations as they balance all of these different capabilities. But it seems like IT has done an excellent job over the last 2.5 decades implementing enterprise systems for manufacturing, to the point where the plant floor itself has almost become, it's been taken for granted. It's where stuff happens, it's where things are made, but frankly, it's the enterprise where the large dollars were spent in terms of transformation, and the plant floor is pretty much still where it was a decade ago, and in many cases 2 decades ago. Sure, there have been many great strides made forward, but the behaviors, the characteristics of the ecosystem down in the plant floor are fairly similar to what they've to where they've been for the last 2 decades. And so it's into that world. And by the way, as you pointed out too, it's not because they can't, it's not because they're not able to. Innovation is the hallmark of U.S. manufacturing. This is where so much of the world's transformation has taken place over the last 3 industrial revolutions, and we're in the same place today, and a great place to capitalize on these great technology and cultural transitions as we move forward. But frankly, it's just been a really, really difficult place for manufacturers. I often talk about it as the baling twine and duct tape mentality. Plant managers are under enormous pressure to make production today safely at a level of quality that's remarkable, and they do whatever they can to make those numbers today with only a little bit of energy applied to what's happening tomorrow. Right, their worldview is really, really quite focused on what's happening on the plant floor today. So in those types of scenarios, we step in as a GE or as a Rockwell or as a Concurrency or as a Microsoft or as a great innovative company with great new ideas, and we say, hey, we've got this transformative new capability, and the manufacturer, whether it's a plant or an enterprise leader, looks at that great new capability and says, man, I am spending 97 cents out of every dollar I have for manufacturing IT on keeping the lights on for this incredibly complex set of systems that I've deployed over the last 2 decades. For me to invest in innovation in the future, I'm looking for a better way to manage my legacy complexity and dovetail this new exciting stuff that I know I've got to get at, but I've got to do it while I'm producing parts safely and at the right level of quality. So there's just so much going on, and at the same time, and I'll leave it with one final thought. On the enterprise side, there's a well-known set of dynamics around IT and the discipline and the rigor that IT brings to the projects that they take on and deploy. They know how to cost justify systems. There's generally significant standards and standardization involved because they typically do something for the entire enterprise and for all sites. Most manufacturing operations have a very, very short window for their projects, and because standards have been so challenging to deploy in this space, standards are really an anathema on the plant floor. And so the plant floor operations folks, they look at IT and they say, I love the idea of a long-term strategy. I love the idea of sustainability and scalability and cybersecurity, the way you've deployed it in the enterprise, but that doesn't work for me in my plants. And so that's part of the dynamic that we have to acknowledge. I think culturally, a lot of great manufacturing organizations have created a sort of a hybrid group between IT and operations, and I think that's laudable and a really good thing. But frankly, the ecosystem that supports the enterprise is a very distinct one from the ecosystem that supports the plants. And when I say ecosystem, I mean the vendors, the systems integrators, all of the players that sort of we represent as an ecosystem here at CESMII typically fall into either an enterprise IT bucket of that ecosystem, or they fall into the bucket that says, I work with the plants. I know the engineers in this plant, and I know the plant manager in this plant, and I sell my solutions and my services to the plant. And so that's another dimension of sort of awareness that I think we have to bring to the table, and another set of behaviors and cultural motivations that form this mosaic that fundamentally as we look to the future and build a better future for manufacturing in America, all of that plays a big role and plays into how we structure what we do here at CESMII, the knowledge, the educational components, the technologies, and really just this entire innovation ecosystem that we're trying to build here.
So how do you cross the threshold between aspiration and action? You know, when you think about a lot of the more modern technologies, a reaction that I see sometimes is that's interesting. That seems like something I'd like to look at someday.
Yeah.
I'm busy tactically. I can't focus on that change that looks like something I might want to investigate, or maybe even if it's something they're interested in, there's not enough confidence that it's going to make a difference, because to them it
Yeah.
feels aspirational, even though when you look at other companies that have done it, they've either saved millions of dollars, or they've transformed their supply chain, or they've sold better. These outcomes exist, but it's still, many businesses are stuck in this sort of like this feeling that it's still aspirational. How are you crossing that threshold?
Yeah, that's a fascinating dialogue. The having been in these three organizations prior to coming here and selling these and building solutions for this space, and then obviously the sales organizations that I've been a part of over those years. One of the biggest challenges in this domain is exactly that. I'm a plant manager. The status quo is just fine. What you're selling, what you're convincing me to do is to buy something and spend money on something that is going to make my performance, my throughput, my quality 2% better than it is today. But it's just so easy to kind of live with the status quo and just sort of settle for that. So and I think that's a big part of our work here is we talk about democratization. Democratization to us means reduce three fundamental things: reducing complexity, and they're all tied together. Reducing costs, reducing complexity will drive the cost reduction, and creates accessibility by more people. So the leap, I think, between aspiration and action, the gap, I think, is closed when we can tangibly demonstrate a dramatic change in accessibility, and that comes by dramatically reducing cost and complexity. And so that's typically a step change. That's something that most organizations struggle to sort of drive. As I think about the vendor ecosystem, you build an exciting new product, you bring it to the marketplace, and you see it implemented, and you see the improvements that you've predicted, and the manufacturers see those, and will sometimes, if you're lucky, they'll talk about them, because that's another big sort of pet peeve of mine, is that most manufacturers, they do great things, but then they struggle to get them to speak about it publicly, because frankly, anything that they say publicly can and will be held against them in some future negotiation with some future vendor. But anyway, that's for another day. That the reality is these case studies that other manufacturers talk about and can bring to the table as a lighthouse example of what's done, that's rarely enough to get someone to catalyze someone into action. I do think that the work that we're doing collectively with great partners like Concurrence to innovate in a way that's different, significantly different. The notion that in the old way, I start from scratch every time with my technology stack, with my domain experts, with my process experts, and I build my solution. And then I've got to start from scratch in the next plant or with the next customer every single time. And there's nothing that's translatable from one application to the next. That day is over. The future is about crowdsourcing and open sourcing even these important elements on the plant floor, so that as I open my second application, I can leverage what I did from the first one, and I can actually copy and paste from my previous implementation to my next implementation, regardless of vendor stack. And this is all sort of part of that mosaic I was talking about, the transformation of the way we think, the way the entire ecosystems behaves, the systems integrators that make money, selling services, hours, for whom that sort of proprietary stack makes sense because they can charge for doing the same work every single time from scratch. That's part of the ecosystem that needs to be brought forward into this new way of thinking. I can charge more for doing better work with smarter people, and I can actually even change my business model. If I do this the new way within this sort of smart manufacturing environment, I can transition from non-recurring engineering, or at least add to my non-recurring engineering services hours. I can add recurring revenue by building these technology components, these templates, these profiles that I can now bring to the marketplace and have a recurring subscription-based revenue for. So again, this is a tapestry that we're sort of trying to put together on the fly, but it's all part of making a significant step change of a difference in terms of cost and complexity and accessibility. And I'll close on this topic with this comment. Smart manufacturing, whether we acknowledge it or not, it's kind of the domain of the Fortune 1000, maybe the Fortune 2000, because they have the pockets that are deep enough for the cost and complexity of the status quo. But I'm confident every single one of them would agree that it's too costly and too complex, even for us. In fact, it's constraining even the big manufacturers from deploying in their medium and small-sized plants. And across virtually every industry, almost 90% of any enterprise's plants are either medium or small plants. And virtually none of those plants get to see these great technologies deployed. And so as we move towards democratization, the idea that we can increase the accessibility is not just to bring the small, medium manufacturers into the fold, although that's essential and vital for U.S. manufacturing competitiveness. It's also for these great enterprises, these Fortune 1000 organizations who can now say, well, if that's the case, I can take this technology I've deployed in all of my big plants and actually now scale it into my medium and small plants. And that's also an important dynamic to kind of think about as well.
Yeah, it's really a rising tide floats all ships sort of idea.
Yes.
We've experienced that with enterprise. A 1 or 2% change in manufacturing efficiency is millions of dollars, just because they're billion-dollar companies. But in a smaller manufacturer, that savings may not be quite as drastic, so they may not pay for the significant innovative effort necessary to get from aspiration to action, so they don't do it. But when this becomes more of an open source way of looking at the world, all companies can benefit, and all of them get better. It's just more about who can adopt the open source faster to be competitive and then innovate on it, versus the innovation happening at this sort of very base level of innovation that is out there. So I love the idea that you're talking about democratization, about the transformation that's happening, about the bringing of technology as a commodity at this manufacturing level as a way to bring more companies forward into a space that creates that efficiency, engagement, competitiveness within the market. I know one thing that you're doing right now is there's a lot of work that goes on around the SM platform. Can you break that down a little bit for us, in terms of what that means in respect to commoditization and democratization? What it really is, the SM platform, and how should an enterprise or a small business look at that?
Yeah, so the status quo for manufacturing systems today is that they're individual applications deployed in one site or more than one site, and they're stovepiped applications with no standard way of talking to other systems that are also in my ecosystem in this plant, and no standard way of integrating even with the enterprise. And where that interoperability has been created, it's been done so in a very expensive and a custom way, which is, as anybody knows, is a very brittle and costly way to sustain going forward. And that's the status quo from the most mature manufacturers to the smallest of manufacturing systems. If they have a manufacturing software solution doing anything in their plants, it's going to be stovepiped and it's going to be an island of information. By the way, we kind of talk about that as a progression: islands of automation in the 80s, islands of information in the 90s. This past decade of the sort of beginning of the fourth industrial revolution has created islands of innovation, right? There's no shortage of innovation in these plants all over the place, but these great pilots, these great ideas have kind of resulted in pockets of innovation that are difficult to scale because of the same reason. The sort of legacy approaches, legacy methodologies, the legacy way of building stovepiped applications is an enormous constraint. And so taking that great bit of innovation that's been done and scaling it up is essentially too costly for the same reason that the historic manufacturing system vendors have faced. And so all of that to say that interoperability and openness and crowdsourcing and finding what we're building as a de facto standard for ingesting information and contextualizing information and making it available to any platform, any solution, whether it's a great vendor solution of the type that we've talked about, or whether it's a new thought leader from tomorrow that has a great idea and wants to build a contemporary predictive model without that sort of costly infrastructure that everybody's building from scratch today in a non-standard and in a proprietary way. We are creating this thin but vital layer of infrastructure to commoditize that data ingestion and data contextualization piece and giving that back to the marketplace. We've, based on our understanding of the marketplace, that data ingestion contextualization piece is not the differentiator and is not the value creator for all but a tiny, tiny handful of companies. And so we provide the standardized layer for these important things to happen and enable all these vendors to do what they do, but just do it in half the time with half the cost. And so that's the idea. We're a not-for-profit. We're not a vendor. We're not here to compete with anyone. We're here to develop some really critical technologies. We don't have time to build our own standard, although we are advocating for important standards all around us that we think are aligned with this mission of interoperability and openness and scalability and so on and so forth. But this notion that we give this infrastructure to the marketplace and allow this ecosystem to build on top of that, and in the process, collectively make it better through crowdsourcing, through open source. And we're doing that together with great partners like you that understand these ideas, that understand that like you've experienced over the last decade and a half in the enterprise IT space, it's often an ecosystem that can solve these big problems together versus a bunch of vendors kind of sitting in their sandbox trying to do this on their own. So that's the innovation platform. It's our attempt using our mandate from the federal government and the funding and great partners in this ecosystem aligned around these ideas to commoditize that layer so that it makes all boats float higher and makes every vendor, every manufacturer a better organization through the use of these and deployment of these systems.
Awesome. Tell me a little bit about the practical nature of how CESMII is doing that within the marketplace. How are you connecting the work that you're chartered to do with the federal government and the SM platform to a practical company engagement? How does that connection work? How do they start working with you? How does it take action?
They say success breeds success, and I think the market has kind of reached a point where after 5, 6, 7, 8 years of pontificating by great thought leaders, the analysts in the space, some of the big vendors, this sort of massive expectation of multi-trillion-dollar value creation by this new wave of technology, this industrial IoT, digital transformation, Industry 4.0, augmented reality, AI, machine learning, all of these great new capabilities have been essentially the catalyst or the means by which we're going to create trillions of dollars of new value in manufacturing. And that's been the mantra for, like I said, 7, 8 years or more. Well, with all of these, I'll say islands of innovation, these pilots that have sort of been put together over the years and have struggled to sort of achieve critical mass or scale. The reality is the industry is looking at this and saying, there's got to be a better way to do this. And so there's I hate to over dramatize this, but I think there's an expectation or a hope, if you will, that there will be a significant transformation of the way things are done, because the status quo, like I said, it's just not. There's enough of an understanding in the marketplace, and enough people have tried across this entire spectrum for folks to say, yeah, the status quo isn't cutting it. And so as we come along with the creation of this institute to focus on these challenges, specifically here in the U.S., and we're not an island. We're working with our counterparts in Germany at the Platform Industry 4.0 industry organization to harmonize and ensure that we're aligned and doing the right things so that manufacturers globally are curing and seeing the advancing of the right ideas, the right training, upskilling efforts, curriculum, et cetera, technology foundations, et cetera. But the reality is we're here at the right time with some of the ideas that everybody is looking for. So thankfully, from the very onset of our existence as an institute a couple of years ago, we've had a handful of great, I shouldn't say handful, a collection of great manufacturing organizations who have been a significant supporter and implementer of these ideas and these technologies as we've brought them to the marketplace. Great companies across all industries like General Mills and Procter & Gamble and ExxonMobil and Corning and ConAgra and Johnson & Johnson, et cetera. And I hate starting to name names because the list gets long, but these organizations are here, number one, because they're significantly mature and they know from the scars and the road rash that they've developed over the last 2 decades and the place where they are today, that there needs to be a better way. But they're also here to contribute. They've got lessons learned, and they've got stories to tell, and they've got experience to share with the marketplace. And so we create a bit of a what I refer to as kind of an innovation central environment for these organizations to come together and tackle, first of all, make sure that we're doing the right things. This is a private-public partnership, so it's these organizations that sit on our board, it's these organizations that sit on our working groups and our committees to develop the right strategy, make sure that technologies, this innovation platform, these profiles are the right things for us to be focused on, make sure that our education, workforce development activities are the right things. So it's basically a rapidly growing ecosystems of manufacturers, integrators, consultants, machine builders, vendors, and academia to rally around these new ideas and to propagate them into the marketplace. All that to say that the most compelling part is, and I think the most important piece is, we don't just bring voices together, we don't just write about things, we create things and we deploy things. And we have the privilege of using the funding that we have from our federal agency, the Department of Energy, to inspire these ideas or inspire the marketplace with these ideas, and then see them actually implemented in manufacturing organizations of all types. So we put these requests for proposals out to the marketplace to essentially invite the best organizations and in many cases the neediest of the organizations that are out there from both ends of the spectrum and everywhere in the between to say, what is the art of the possible? Using some of these new ideas that CESMII is propagating in the marketplace, what does that look like in our place? And we can fund the deployment of these capabilities on their shop floor with their partner, with their software solutions that they are standardizing on or want to innovate and try to standardize on. One of our great member partners here is Procter & Gamble, and I'll never forget, a little over a year ago, one of the executives there spoke to me and said, "John, you may think we've got deep pockets and you may think that we're good at what we do," and he says we are. We're effective. We're clearly at the top of our game from a manufacturing perspective, He says, but innovation for us is as hard as it is for anyone else, and it's costly. What we would love is for CESMII to create a simple, scalable way for us to innovate more effectively, and then to deploy that, either fail quickly, if that's the case, we want to fail quickly, or if we're successful, deploy quickly. Deploy knowing that we can scale up if we need to, right? So this notion of innovation triage was something that came from one of our great members there to say, using these funds, using these ideas, our smart manufacturing first principles, we can fund the most innovative and the most creative and the most thoughtful organizations that come around us here to bring these ideas forward, see if they work, refine them, improve them, and then give them back to the industry in ways that, like I said before, no other individual organization can.
Awesome. Last question, John, and this may be the biggest, but I'm really interested to hear your take on this. You are a change agent. You're clearly engaged in transforming an industry, not just a company. And I would love to learn who's inspired you to be the change agent that you are, people that you run across, people in the industry, personal influences. Who's inspired you to be that kind of change agent?
Yeah, that's tough when there's been a number of different individuals and people that I've had the privilege of knowing over the years that have influenced and been a big part of that. But I remember when I made my first career change in 2000, I was with Rockwell Automation. Ultimately came back to Rockwell Automation, but I was with Rockwell Automation, and I was confronted by a friend of mine to leave Rockwell Automation with an opportunity to leave Rockwell Automation, help him raise some venture capital and build a small company. I had a conversation with my father, who challenged me to think in some really simple ways, but I think profound ways about what my life would be staying where I was and envision the best possible future by taking a leap of faith, if you will, and leaving Rockwell to do something that would, for the first time in my career, in my life, allow me to potentially change the world, at least from a work perspective, right? So that resulted in me for a very risk-averse person, making a decision to leave this great organization where I was one of the youngest directors they'd ever hired in their history, leave this great organization and essentially be employee number 2 for a tiny startup. But in looking back at that, it was probably the single most profound career decision I've ever made, and it's paved the way for me to continue making those types of choices. Since then, I've not been in a single role. I went from there to GE and from GE back to Rockwell. I haven't been in a single role that was an established sort of status quo kind of role. I've been a change agent in each of those organizations at the vanguard of this smart manufacturing space. I obviously didn't know that at the time, but frankly, it put me on a path to essentially looking for, consciously and subconsciously, looking for ways to transform the industry. And it sort of boils back down to a very simple conversation with my father to help me sort of really create perspective and build that sort of nonlinear thought process that resulted in me taking that leap of faith and put me on a different trajectory for the rest of my career.
Awesome. Thank you, John. And so inspiring. Such a great way for us to think about taking the leap of faith in our own walks of life, whatever that means, whatever choice that means, whatever action that means, whatever movement from where we are now to where we intend to be. That's really helpful. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing the story of CESMII and your own journey and what it's meant to change the industry. It's been a great time spending some time with you.
Thank you. It's been a privilege for me to have this conversation. I enjoy working with you, your organization. You're a privilege. It's a privilege for us to engage in this way and for us to collectively try try to move the needle. These are audacious things. You made that comment before. These are noble goals. These are audacious goals. We collectively are moving the needle from aspiration to actuality, and it's with partners like you that we can stand confidently and move forward. Thank you.
Awesome. And also thank you to our listeners. We're so glad you joined us this time on the Change Agent podcast. What a great opportunity for us to hear from fantastic individuals in the industry who are implementing change within their businesses. We will see you next time when we have another awesome conversation about change and what it's doing to change the industry, organizations, and personal lives. Thank you.